Ma'am, I need to see some identification. Now.
This is my house. Why do I need to show you ID at my own home?
We received a call about a possible break-in. ID. Now.
A break-in? I just pulled up in my car with my keys.
I'm not going to ask again. Hand over your...
Ma'am, I need you to step back from the property. This is my house. I live here. I'm going to need to see some ID. Now. You're standing in my driveway. This is my home. The body camera footage is crystal clear. A woman in scrubs, exhausted after a 12-hour shift at the hospital, standing in her own driveway, being treated like a criminal. What started as a neighbor's mistaken 911 call turned into a nightmare that would cost a police department $1.7 million, end a cop's career, and expose a pattern of discrimination that had been hiding in plain sight for years. The badge cam was rolling. The truth was being recorded, and what happened next would shock an entire city. Before we dive into this absolutely insane story, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. Her name was Dr. Amara Williams, 38 years old, emergency room physician. She had spent the last decade saving lives, working grueling shifts in the ER, and building a career she was proud of. Amara wasn't just good at her job, she was exceptional. Her colleagues described her as the doctor you wanted in a crisis, the one who stayed calm when everyone else was panicking, the one who could make split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. Amara had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, the daughter of a single mother who cleaned houses to pay for her education. She'd been the first in her family to go to college, let alone medical school. Every achievement had been hard-won. Every promotion earned through countless hours of study and sacrifice. And 5 years ago, after years of saving and planning, she'd finally bought her dream home. It was a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Maplewood Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and well-maintained lawns, the kind of place where people walked their dogs in the evening and kids rode bikes in cul-de-sacs. Amara had fallen in love with it the moment she saw it. Large windows that let in natural light, a spacious backyard perfect for the garden she planned to start, a 2-car garage, a front porch where she could sit with her morning coffee on rare days off. She'd been living there for 5 years without incident. Her neighbors knew her. She waved to them. She brought in their trash cans when they were out of town. She was quiet, kept to herself mostly, but was always friendly when she encountered people. On this particular evening, a Tuesday in late September, Amara had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift in the ER. It had been one of those days when nothing went right. Multiple trauma cases, a cardiac arrest, a child with severe injuries from a car accident. She was mentally and physically exhausted, running on caffeine and adrenaline that was finally wearing off. She pulled into her driveway around 9:45 p.m., parking her Honda SUV in its usual spot. The motion sensor lights clicked on, illuminating her front path. She grabbed her purse and her insulated lunch bag from the passenger seat, locked the car, and started walking toward her front door. She was digging in her purse for her keys when she noticed something strange. A police cruiser was slowly rolling down her street, spotlight scanning house numbers. Then the spotlight landed on her own front porch, at her own house. She turned, confused, shielding her eyes from the bright light. The cruiser pulled into her driveway, blocking her car. The spotlight stayed on her. She couldn't see who was driving, but she heard the car door open. "Ma'am, step away from the residence." The voice was male, authoritative, commanding. Amara's exhausted brain struggled to process what was happening. "I'm sorry, what?" she called back, still unable to see past the spotlight. "I said step away from the property. Put your hands where I can see them." That's when her stomach dropped. That's when the exhaustion was replaced by a cold wave of fear and confusion. "This is my house," Amara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm going to need to see some ID, Manal. You're standing in my driveway. This is my home." The officer stepped into view now, moving around the spotlight. His name was Officer Derek Mason, a 12-year veteran of the Maplewood Police Department. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with his hand resting on his belt near his service weapon, not drawing it, but making it clear it was there. "I'm going to need to see some ID, Mantle," Mason said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amara felt a surge of indignation. "You're in my driveway. This is my home. Why do I need to show you ID?" "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible break-in at this address. I need to verify your identity and your right to be here." Amara's mind was racing now. A break-in? At her own house? She'd just pulled up in her car, walked to her own front door with her own keys. What part of this looked like a break-in? "Who called?" "I can't disclose that information. ID, please." Here's where Amara made a decision that probably saved her. Despite her anger, despite her exhaustion, despite every instinct telling her to argue, she pulled out her wallet and handed her driver's license. Mason took it, shining his flashlight on it, comparing the photo to her face. He looked at the address. It matched the house they were standing in front of. Exactly. There was a long pause. Amara watched his face, waiting for the apology that should have come immediately. It didn't. "Wait here," Mason said, walking back to his cruiser with her ID. "Wait here?" Amara called after him. "At my own house? On my own property?" Mason ignored her, getting back in his car. Amara could see him through the windshield, talking on his radio, typing something into his computer. Minutes passed. 5 minutes. Then 10. She was standing on her own front porch, in her scrubs, holding her lunch bag, locked out of her own house, while a police officer sat in her driveway running her information. Finally, Mason got out of the car and walked back over. He handed her his ID. "Everything checks out," he said, as if he was doing her a favor. "Of course it checks out," Amar said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It's my house, my name, my address. I told you that from the beginning." "We have to follow up on all calls, ma'am." "What call? What exactly was reported?" Mason shifted his weight and for the first time seemed slightly uncomfortable. "A neighbor reported a suspicious person attempting to enter this residence." Amara felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. Suspicious person? She was a doctor, in scrubs, coming home from work, entering her own house with her own keys. What was suspicious about that? "Which neighbor?" she asked. "I can't disclose that." "Did they describe this suspicious person?" Mason hesitated. "The caller said they saw someone who didn't belong in the neighborhood." There it was, the unspoken part, the real reason she was being questioned on her own property. She didn't belong in this neighborhood, not according to someone, anyway. Quick question for everyone watching. Have you ever been profiled or judged based on how you look? Drop a comment if you have. Amara took a deep breath. "Officer, I've lived here for 5 years. 5 years. I'm a physician at County General Hospital. I work long shifts and I come home late often. This is my house. I belong here. And I should not be interrogated in my own driveway because someone decided I don't look like I belong." Mason's jaw tightened. "Are we done here?" "Are we done here?" Amara repeated, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. "You're free to go inside, ma'am." Mason turned back toward his cruiser. "I want your badge number," Amara called after him. Mason stopped, turned around slowly. "Excuse me?" "Your badge number and your name. I'm filing a complaint." Something changed in Mason's expression then. The professional mask slipped. "You want to file a complaint because I responded to a 911 call? Because I did my job? You detained me at my own home without cause. You made me stand outside my own house for 15 minutes. You treated me like a criminal. Yes, I'm filing a complaint." Mason walked back toward her, and now his body language had changed, more aggressive, more confrontational. "Let me explain something to you. When we get a call, we respond. We investigate. If you've got a problem with that, maybe you should talk to whoever called it in." "I would love to, but you won't tell me who it was."
"That's department policy. Then I guess I'll be talking to your department about their policies." Mason stared at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out his citation book and started writing. Amara couldn't believe what she was seeing. "Are you seriously writing me a ticket right now?" "You're being cited for obstruction of justice and failure to comply with a lawful order." "What?" Amara's voice cracked with disbelief. "I gave you my ID. I answered your questions. I've been nothing but cooperative." "You became argumentative and hostile, interfering with my ability to complete my investigation." The citation was for $350. Mason tore it off and held it out to her. Amara snatched it from his hand, her hands shaking now, not with fear, but with rage. "This is retaliation," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is retaliation because I said I'd file a complaint." "Have a nice evening, ma'am," Mason said, walking back to his cruiser. He backed out of her driveway and drove away, leaving Amara standing there with a citation in one hand and her house keys in the other, trying to process what had just happened. She finally went inside, locked the door behind her, and broke down crying, not just from the encounter itself, but from the accumulated weight of it all. The years of microaggressions, the times she'd been followed in stores, the way people clutched their purses tighter when she walked past. And now this, being treated like a criminal at her own home, in her own neighborhood, after saving lives all day. But Amara wasn't just angry. She was determined. She pulled out her phone and started making calls. The first call was to her friend Monica, a civil rights attorney who she'd met at a community event 2 years earlier. She explained what happened, her voice still shaking. Monica listened carefully, asking specific questions about the encounter, about what was said, about the citation. "Do you have any video?" Monica asked. "No, I didn't think to record it. It happened so fast." "The officer's body camera would have captured everything. File the complaint tomorrow, officially, in writing, and request a copy of the body cam footage. They're required to provide it." "What about the ticket?" "We'll fight it. Don't pay it. That's an admission of guilt. We'll contest it and use it as evidence of retaliation." The second call was to the local NAACP chapter. The third was to a local investigative reporter who had done stories on police misconduct before. By midnight, Amara had set wheels in motion that would eventually bring down not just Officer Mason, but expose problems throughout the entire department. The next morning, despite having barely slept, Amara drove to the Maplewood Police Department and filed a formal complaint. She wrote out everything that happened in careful detail. She requested the body camera footage. She asked for an internal investigation. The desk sergeant who took her complaint was professional, but gave nothing away. He said, "Someone will be in touch." 2 weeks went by. Silence. No crawl, no email, nothing. Amara called the department. She was told the complaint was under review, and they'd contact her when the review was complete. Another week passed, still nothing. That's when Monica, her attorney, sent a formal letter to the department requesting the body camera footage under the state's public records law. The department had 30 days to comply. On day 29, they received the footage. And when Amara and Monica watched it together in Monica's office, what they saw was even worse than Amara remembered. The body camera clearly showed Amara in her scrubs, exhausted, holding her work bag, standing at her own front door. It captured Mason's aggressive tone from the start. It recorded their entire conversation, including Amara's calm explanations and Mason's escalating hostility. But here's what made Monica sit up straight. In the background, you could hear Mason's radio chatter. The dispatcher had clearly told him that the homeowner's name was Dr. Amara Williams and that the registered vehicle in the driveway matched the address. Mason had known, before he even got out of the car, that Amara was likely the homeowner, and he'd proceeded to detain and question her anyway. Even worse, the body camera footage continued after Mason walked back to his cruiser. While Amara stood on her porch, you could hear Mason talking to himself, muttering things that absolutely should not have been said. Comments about the neighborhood, comments about these people, comments that made it crystal clear this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was profiling, this was bias, this was discrimination. "We've got him," Monica said quietly. "This is going to be a very expensive mistake for the department." Do you think the body cam footage was the smoking gun here? Let me know in the comments what you think. Monica filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against Officer Mason and the Maplewood Police Department. The lawsuit alleged racial profiling, unlawful detention, false citation, and violation of Amara's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure. The local reporter who Amara had contacted ran a story about the incident. It was picked up by the regional news, then the national news. Within days, Amara's story was trending on social media. The body camera footage, which was now public record, was viewed millions of times. The Maplewood Police Department released a statement saying they took all complaints seriously and were conducting a thorough internal investigation. Officer Mason was placed on paid administrative leave pending the outcome. But then something interesting happened. Other people started coming forward. A black family who'd been stopped while moving into their new home in Maplewood. A Latino teenager who'd been questioned while sitting in his own car in his own driveway. An Asian American woman who'd been asked for proof of residency while checking her own mailbox. All by the same officer. All by Derek Mason. The internal investigation expanded, and what they found was damning. Over his 12 years with the department, Mason had a pattern, a clear, documented pattern of targeting people of color in predominantly white neighborhoods. He had more complaints filed against him than any other officer in the department, complaints that were filed, noted, and then quietly dismissed. The police union initially defended him. They released a statement saying Mason was a dedicated officer being unfairly targeted by political correctness and anti-police sentiment. That statement lasted exactly 2 days after the union quietly walked it back after the full body camera footage went viral and public opinion turned decisively against Mason. 6 months after the initial incident, the department's internal investigation concluded. Mason was found to have violated multiple departmental policies, including racial profiling, abuse of authority, and filing a false citation. He was terminated from the force and lost his pension eligibility. But that wasn't the end of it. The federal lawsuit proceeded, and as part of the discovery process, Monica's legal team uncovered something explosive: internal memos and emails showing that supervisors had been aware of complaints against Mason for years, but had taken no meaningful action. Some emails actually showed supervisors dismissing complaints as oversensitive or suggesting that Mason was just being proactive in certain neighborhoods. The lawsuit, which had originally named just Officer Mason, was amended to include the police chief, several supervisors, and the city itself for failing to properly train, supervise, and discipline officers with patterns of discriminatory behavior. The city's attorneys tried to settle early. They offered $150,000. Monica rejected it. They came back with $400,000. Monica rejected that too. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about accountability. This was about exposing a system that had allowed this behavior to continue for years. The case went to trial 18 months after the initial incident. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Amara testified, describing the fear and humiliation of being detained at her own home. The body camera footage was played in court. The dispatcher who'd given Mason Amara's information testified. Other victims of Mason's profiling testified. Expert witnesses on police procedures and racial bias testified. Mason's attorneys tried to argue that he'd simply been doing his job, responding to a 911 call, following protocol. But the body camera footage undermined every argument they made. You could see it, you could hear it. There was no ambiguity. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, they found in favor of Dr. Amara Williams on every single count. They awarded her $1.7 million in damages, $700,000 in compensatory damages for emotional distress and violation of her civil rights, and $1 million in punitive damages, specifically designed to punish the department for its systemic failures. The courtroom erupted. Amara, who had maintained her composure through the entire trial, finally broke down crying. Monica hugged her. Reporters rushed out to file their stories. The city's attorneys sat in stunned silence. Outside the courthouse, Amara gave a brief statement to the media. She said, "This was never about money. This was about making sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. This was about holding people accountable who think badges give them the right to treat people as less than human." She paused, collecting herself.
The Maplewood Police Department underwent a complete overhaul. The police chief resigned. Several supervisors were demoted or transferred. The department hired a new chief who immediately implemented mandatory bias training, a civilian oversight committee, and a new complaint process that included outside investigators. Mason, the officer at the center of it all, tried to appeal his termination. The appeal was denied. He tried to get hired by other police departments in neighboring jurisdictions. Word had spread, and no one would touch him. He eventually moved out of state, his law enforcement career effectively over. The neighbor who made the initial 911 call, that information eventually came out during the trial. It was a woman named Patricia Henderson who lived 3 houses down. She'd called 911 to report a suspicious person trying to enter a house on her street. When asked to describe the person, she'd said, "They just don't look like they belong here." Patricia was called as a witness during the trial. Her testimony was painful to watch. She admitted she'd never actually met Amara, despite living on the same street for 5 years. She admitted she'd made assumptions based solely on seeing a black woman approaching a house in her neighborhood. She tried to claim she'd been concerned about crime, but under cross-examination couldn't cite a single burglary or crime that had occurred in their neighborhood in the past 5 years. After the trial, Patricia's name became public. Her social media was discovered. Screenshots revealed a pattern of posts that confirmed what everyone already suspected about her views. She ended up selling her house and moving away, unable to handle the social backlash. 3 years after the incident, Amara is still living in her house in Maplewood Estates. She still works as an ER physician at County General Hospital. She's been promoted to senior attending physician and now helps train medical residents. She used a portion of her settlement to establish a legal defense fund for people who experience racial profiling and discrimination but can't afford quality legal representation. The fund has helped dozens of people pursue justice in cases that might otherwise have been ignored. She also speaks publicly about her experience, visiting schools, community centers, and police academies. Her message is always the same, that bias isn't always conscious, that systems need accountability, and that change only happens when people are willing to stand up and demand it. In one interview, 2 years after the verdict, she was asked if she thought justice had truly been served. "Justice for me, personally? Yes," she said thoughtfully. "But justice in the bigger picture, that's ongoing. One verdict doesn't undo generations of systemic problems. One fired officer doesn't fix a broken system. But it's a step, it's accountability, and accountability is where change begins." She paused, her expression serious. "The saddest part isn't what happened to me that night. I survived it. I had resources to fight back. The saddest part is thinking about how many times this happens to people who don't have body camera footage, who don't have lawyers, who don't have the time or money or energy to fight back. Those are the cases that haunt me." Have you been following this whole story? Type accountability in the comments if you think the outcome sent the right message. The case became a landmark in civil rights law, frequently cited in training materials and legal textbooks. Law schools use it to teach about Fourth Amendment rights and racial profiling. Police academies use the body camera footage as a cautionary tale about bias and abuse of authority. Officer Mason never publicly apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing. According to people who knew him, he maintains to this day that he was just doing his job, that he was the victim of political correctness and anti-police sentiment. He's reportedly working in private security now, far from Maplewood, and has stayed out of the public eye. The dispatcher who gave Mason the information that Amara was likely the homeowner but watched him proceed with the detention anyway was also disciplined. She remained with the department but was required to undergo additional training and was moved to a different division. The real question that lingered after everything was settled wasn't about money or punishment. It was about prevention. How do you stop this from happening in the first place?
How do you change hearts and minds? How do you dismantle systems built on bias? There are no easy answers, but the Amar Williams case provided a blueprint for accountability. Document everything. Know your rights. File complaints. Find good legal representation. Use whatever platform you have to tell your story, and never accept injustice as inevitable. The $1.7 million judgment got headlines. The fired officer made news, but the real impact was in the hundreds of small policy changes that happen in police departments across the country. The increased use of body cameras, the better complaint processes, the civilian oversight committees, the bias training, the message sent that officers who abuse their authority will face real consequences. Was it enough? Probably not. Is the problem solved? Absolutely not. Are there still Derek Masons out there wearing badges and making traffic stops and knocking on doors? Unfortunately, yes. But there's one less than there was before. And there's one more doctor who knows her rights, has her story heard, and won't ever have to stand in her own driveway and prove she belongs. So there you have it. A doctor comes home from saving lives and gets detained at her own house. A neighbor makes a call based on prejudice and assumptions. An officer with a pattern of discrimination finally faces consequences, and a system that protected bad behavior gets exposed and forced to change. If you made it to the end, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We cover stories like this that matter, stories about justice, accountability, and standing up for what's right. Let me know in the comments, was the $1.7 million settlement enough? Should it have been higher? What would you have done in Dr. Williams' position? I'll see you in the next one.